Many other researchers, and not just NICER, have recommended personal or episodic memories to be studied. He would say something like the War of the Ghosts, old as it is, and other things, lack external validity. In other words, it can't be applied very well to everyday circumstance. So that's among the sentiments for NICER recommending personal episodic memories. So, for example, and this is going back about 40 years, and this is another one of those cases where research is a little bit older, but still pretty revolutionary for its time, and it's maybe one of the few articles to investigate this. Dr. Linton conducted a study that demonstrates the kind of research NICER was calling for. Like Ebbinghaus, Linton studied her own memory, and you remember he engaged in nonsense syllables. But her methods of data, like those of Ebbinghaus, had a heroic quality. Every day for 6 years, which is amazing, she wrote brief descriptions of 2 or more events that happened that day, and each month she conducted tests of her memory that did involve recognition. And unlike Ebbinghaus, Linton was recording and testing memories of actual life events that had actually happened to her, but not experimental materials. And here's the long quote. Memory tests proceeded as follows. Once a month, items were drawn randomly from the accumulated event pool, and after reading a pair of randomly paired descriptions, I estimated their order and attempted to reconstruct each item's date. And next, I briefly classified my memory search. For example, I might count backwards through a series of events such as school quarters or conference meetings, etc., and reevaluated each item's significance, salience. And after 6 years, the experiment had reached imposing dimensions. I'd written more than 5,500 items and tested 11,000, about 150 a month. And each item generated only a few minutes each day, but the testing was very long. So among the things that she found is that some items were easily memorable, retrievable, any description such as I did X for the first time, so something was unusual. Other items became harder and harder to recall, especially when the written description did not pertain to a single event, but something that had been repeated often. So during the first 20 months, Linton found autobiographical memories to be very, very durable using this recognition sort of task. But what tended to predict memory better was if it had any distinction to it at all. If it were rather routine, then she had trouble recognizing or putting things in chronological order. And she does say that accurate construction of memory is pretty possible. For instance, the semi-absurd quote from your text, where were you on June 28th, 2016, approaching 8 years ago? Well, of course that may be a ridiculous question, but you might remember where you were on November 8th, 2016. That was the election between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. And of course, it's always on a Tuesday. So could I work backwards from November 8th and sort of piece together what day of the week June 28th was and maybe make a reasonable deduction of what may have happened that day? Well, that's possible. So Linton's forgotten items may have been due to a fan effect. So in other words, I attach many, many memories to one sort of thing and have trouble recalling that one thing. For example, an example of this, my many visits to McKibben Hall on SFA's campus, and I come here every weekday and often on Saturday, result in a fan effect of sorts. So for instance, every time I pull in the parking lot, I have to find a new parking spot, sometimes right by the building and sometimes in the next lot out. And I often come out to the lot having no idea where the car is because I park there every day. So in a sense, all of those experiences have been fanned out, if you will. And I have a poor memory for where I may have parked because I've parked there quite literally, I guess, a few thousand times now. Now, on the other hand, if there's somewhere I seldom go, like the mall in Tyler where I go twice a year, or the mall in Longview 2 or 3 times a year, I'd have better luck finding my car there because I seldom go there and I don't have a lot of experiences with that. So it goes with her forgotten items. Items that were repeated or things that she did often, she wouldn't have specific memories for because they repeated themselves on her calendar. Barcelou, interesting family, among young people, found college students could only recall 21% of events that happened the prior summer, and they often relied on summaries. So that suggests there's sort of a gist nature to autobiographical memories, that people aren't so good at recalling things. Now, you remember that Linton relied on recognition, especially chronological order of memories, whereas Barcelou is talking about recall, and even these young people couldn't necessarily append dates to things or have really, really specific ideas about when things happen. They offered summaries. Brewer used beepers to remind participants to write down events. Participants were tested 2 and 41 months later, plus rating scales of significance and pleasance, etc. And what Brewer found was that distinctive experiences like Thanksgiving break recognized more often. They had better memories for those sorts of things that were distinct than everyday memories that were sort of indistinct. And, that's so weird that she would mention Thanksgiving particularly. I do remember, this is going to sound crazy, Thanksgiving break 1988, almost 36 years ago. I was a fresh person in college, and we drove home from Dayton, Ohio to Louisville, Kentucky. One of our parents picked us up, my buddies from college. And I distinctly remember us going through the McDonald's drive-thru on that Wednesday night right before Thanksgiving. Back then, the colleges often went all the way through Wednesday. We only had a 4-day weekend for Thanksgiving, and Thanksgiving was the first day. But I distinctly remember that because it was such an unusual time. It was dark relatively early. My friend's dad had a Cadillac and stopping at McDonald's, the whole thing. That was distinct. But there are countless other things, of course, I wouldn't have a strong memory for. So Brewer concluded that autobiographical memories, while showing many of the, oops, a little exaggerated there, the phenomena demonstrated in lab studies, also showed important differences. Few overt recall errors were found, suggesting to Brewer that personal memories are reasonably accurate copies of their original experiences, even if they're occasionally, poorly dredged up. Now, Bauer et al. Endorsing that, and your author endorses this to some degree, said that explored childhood amnesia, or infantile amnesia it's sometimes called, and that's an important detail in the Roseanne Barr case that we'll speak of shortly. Women interviewed annually 4 times, once a year, 4 different years. Please tell me your earliest memory. And here's some snippets. So this particular person, a year apart, remembered a vacation, Flintstone World in South Dakota. I never heard of it. Crawling through a crocodile. It was a play area. I remember my brother sticking his face in one side of the tunnel saying, "Come on, it's okay, come over here." We had a foster brother who was at the other end saying, "Go ahead, it's all right," etc. So very specific stuff. And the person repeats it later. Spoke this time of a ceramic alligator, talking about coming out through the end of a tunnel, etc. Those sorts of things. But it's somewhat consistent. And as you can see, the 2 reports describing what appears to be the same incident, they aren't word for word, and we wouldn't really expect them to be unless the participant had memorized a specific wording. Nonetheless, the detail make it likely that she is indeed recalling the same incident. Other researchers echo Bauer's proposal that autobiographical memory is more than just a storehouse. For example, see it as a uniquely human form of memory that integrates experiences. That is, our autobiographical memories are an important means for constructing and interpreting our sense of who we are, what our goals are, and they may even form a basis for what we think about our lives. My advisor wrote a paper with Elizabeth Loftus that said much of personality is memory. And there's a suggestion that the stories that we tell about ourselves are indeed of that nature, that they form our impression of who we are.